Episode 30.
This is Ross Goldberg, and you are listening to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast.
Struggling to get your business online? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast. Now, here's your hosts, Michael and Teresa Blaze.
Welcome to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast. I'm Michael, and I'm here with my wife and business partner, Teresa.
Hello, everybody.
So I hope you guys have been enjoying the interviews. We've had a lot of fun putting them together and talking. It's so cool because it's kind of like you're being coached by an expert about just, amazing stuff, getting all your questions answered and all that good stuff. So I hope you're getting a lot out of that.
And, if you guys have someone that you want us to reach out to, hey, let me know. Really? I mean, I'm always up for bringing in people that you want to see interviewed or that you think would be a good fit. Or if you think that you would like to be a guest on our show and think you would like to be a good fit, please email sbppodcast@gmail.com.
So who do we have tonight, Therese?
Well, tonight we kind of took a little bit off the beaten path. We're not necessarily talking as much about business, but we're talking about something that usually affects business and different things that go around it. And that's, we're talking to Tom Merritt. I don't even know exactly how to describe him. He's kind of a jack of all trades and a podcaster to everybody. He runs a few different podcasts. He's a partner in a couple of different podcasts. He also runs the Daily Tech News Show, which I have yet to listen to today. I should do that after this recording is done. And what he does is he focuses in on tech and, what's happening in the world of tech and really does it from an independent standpoint. He also runs, or helps host Cord Killers, which talks about, how you could watch whatever shows you want, whenever you want, that kind of stuff. I mean, the guy just does a lot of really cool stuff. You can find him at tommerritt.com, and he's also an author, which, by the way, I plan on getting his book. Hint, hint, Mike.
We'll grab
anyway, no, but honestly, I just had a really fun time talking tech with this guy. Talking tech in the context of how to best use it for marketing, and what we saw coming in 2017. It was very, very enjoyable, and I hope you get a lot out of it. And if you want more shows like that, let me know. Honestly, I'll do what I can to get you guys what you want, but I need to know what you guys want.
I gotta tell you, though, we've got some amazing interviews coming up. Oh my goodness! So stay in radio vernacular. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Or as Ron Wolfley will sometimes say, press the ear to the transistor.
Your cardinal's sticking out up there, babe.
What? So I'm a Cardinals fan.
Cardinals
Don't
too.
Kill me.
All right. So with that, with no further, good.
With that, let's pass it off to Tom Merritt. Hey Tom, welcome to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here.
We're glad to have you. You have got an interesting story going on. I mean, because based on your bio, you've worked with Leo Laporte. You've worked with, you worked in a lot of different areas, and considering that you've taken up a good portion of my podcast feed with about 3 of your shows, you are kind of a jack of all trades, but a master of podcasting.
Well, thank you. I hope I do all right. Yeah. I do a bunch of podcasts, and I enjoy doing them.
So I guess I wanted to bring you on because you've got a very interesting story, in particular when it comes to the Daily Tech News show. For those that don't know, the show it's a daily show that covers all the ins and outs of technology, and it's kind of one of my daily listens because you learn about all kinds of interesting things. And I was wanting to bring you on because you've built up an entire, what I could only describe as a community. Did you want to talk about that and kind of, tell us kind of how that came about and so on and so
sure.
forth?
No, I'd be happy to. It does seem like we've got a really good thing going on with the folks who are around the show. A lot of folks in lots of different areas. A lot of people in technology and IT, as you might expect, but also people in things like logistics, agriculture, who are willing to share their expertise with each other. And that's what I really like about the show is if you're a person who's out there doing something, you're an expert in your field, you can share that expertise through the show, and we'll kind of get it in front of other folks, and so we all can help each other understand more about the show. The roots of that audience go all the way back to CNET. I started working at CNET after Tech TV let us all go in San Francisco in 2004. And we put together a podcast in 2005, right when podcasting was young and up and starting up, called Buzz Out Loud. And around that podcast, Molly Wood, Veronica Belmont, myself, and later Jason Howell all made sure to bring the audience into the show. We would read emails. We'd play voicemails. We actually had a phone line that people would leave voicemails on, and we'd have to download those and play them on the show. And I had learned that by working at Tech TV. I had seen all of the shows, especially Screensavers and Call for Help, be able to successfully bring folks into the show like that, and so I wanted to keep doing that. A lot of folks enjoyed that. They liked the community at Buzz Out Loud. They still speak fondly of it, as do we. And so when I moved over to Leo Laporte's Twit Network in 2010, I kept doing the same thing. Obviously got the benefit of the wider Twit audience that Leo has cultivated over the years. And then in 2013, I had to move down to Los Angeles because my wife got a job down here. So for a year, we tried with me hosting Tech News Today from LA, but after a year, Leo decided that he wanted someone local up there in Petaluma. So I went off on my own and for the third time started up a new show, and thankfully enough people were interested in following it that we've got a good community over there.
And I think that's kind of the cool thing. Now, I mean, what is the format? I mean, when you approach a show, how do you research what topics you're going to actually talk about?
Yeah, it's different for different shows, but for the Daily Tech News Show, I'm really focused on trying to provide understanding of the things you'll see in the news each day and a little bit of depth and exposing you to some things that you might not have run across. So the short version being, I look over my own RSS feeds that I have cultivated over the years. I look at TechMeme. I look at Google News. I look at our own Daily Tech News Show subreddit, which has people in the audience submitting things. And I sort of triangulate those to identify, usually it's around 3 or 4 stories that everybody's talking about. And those are going to go in no matter what I think of them because everybody's talking about them. And then I try to balance that out with stories that are showing up in those places, but either are following up on a story we've been talking about or provide something unusual or something cool. Yet today's show, I've got a story about Carnegie Mellon's AI beating poker champions at playing poker. It's not the buzziest story. It's not grabbing all the headlines out there, but I'm like, that's really interesting. That's something that is worth paying attention to.
And I could so get off on that tangent because,
yeah, right.
I mean, you talk about AI, it's just like there are so many things that are being done in the world of AI. You're just like, are you kidding?
Yeah, no, it started with chess and then Go and now poker. And that's the crazy thing. And not to get too far off into that story, but a computer that is learning to bluff, that to me that's a significant step. That's something you want to talk about.
And that's something that is kind of scary.
Could be, yeah.
Sure. That just conjures Skynet all over in my head right now.
Yeah, totally.
Or like that poem that I wrote way back when, that electronic romance poem.
You're going to have to send that to Tom. Yes, you're going to have to send it to Tom. Anyway. All right. So okay. So you crowdsource your content, plus you do your own research, but then you've also got this monetization component. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. When I first launched Daily Tech News Show, I had intended to make it advertising supported because most of the shows that I'd ever done were advertising supported. I had done a couple of shows on Kickstarter, but those had to be single season shows. Kickstarter doesn't allow ongoing funding. And about 6 months before I launched DTNS, a company called Patreon had launched, meaning to help musicians mostly, but other artists to get paid per work. You would patronize someone and say, I will give you $1 per work, maybe $1 per song, etc. And my friend Brian Brushwood, who I do Chord Killers with, said, well, let's try this for Chord Killers. Let's see if we can get folks to support us that way. We did. It was incredibly successful right out of the gate. And so I decided partway through January, which was the first month of Daily Tech News Show, to say, well, let's try it for Daily Tech News Show as well. And I just did some back-of-the-envelope calculations and said, if we get to this amount, I believe that we'll be making more than if we sold ads. So we will go ad-free. And we have been commercial-free on that, which I think is a good advantage for a news show to say, we're not under the sway or influence, however small, of any outside organization. We're able to be supported directly by you. We're under your sway as someone who supports the show.
And how much?
That is a cool concept.
Yeah, it really is. And how much are you guessing? You don't have to give exact numbers, but how much are you guessing it's costing you to, one, run the show, including the talent that you're bringing in, and two, how much are you on average bringing in?
Yeah, so if you go to patreon.com, you'll see how much we're getting from Patreon. Right now it's around $15,000. And on top of that, we get per year, it's $15,000 a month, right? So that is the majority of our budget. Per year, we're getting a few $1,000s from direct PayPal donations. We're getting a few $1,000s per year from things we sell in our store, like hoodies and mugs and stuff like that. But the majority of it's coming in through Patreon. And the majority of it goes to paying myself a salary, paying our producer a salary, paying our contractors. And we try to keep the rest of the expenses down so that we have a really efficient organization.
I think that is really cool. So what you're saying is if you factor in, I'm guessing you'd probably average about $20,000 a year based off of one show then. So then what you're saying is that you're not running advertising. You're just delivering content, valuable content at that, and people are saying, you know what, I like it enough that I want to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. We took what Adam Curry and John Dvorak did with No Agenda and said, we're going to make the same proposal. It's value for value. If you get value out of the show, we only ask that you give a little value back if you can afford it.
Man, that makes sense. Yeah, it's so difficult as a podcast to get sponsors anyway. And, this makes it easy for you to monetize. Although, if you're not delivering valuable content, obviously your listeners probably won't donate.
Correct.
Because most people are going to vote with their feet.
But
that's cool.
Yeah. And to me, that's the same issue as getting an audience, right? If you don't have valuable content, you won't get subscribers either. So you have to be a little extra valuable to get people willing to kick $1 your way. And you're not going to get every single person that listens or watches. That's fine. But I like the fact that I only need to think about the audience when I make the show. I don't need to also consider, what is the kind of audience that a particular advertiser who has a lot of money to spend wants to reach? And should I skew for that audience? Which is something I ran into at Tech TV, at CNET, even at Twit, which was you needed to pay attention to the advertiser's needs as well as to your subscribers.
That's very interesting.
That makes a lot of sense. I have to ask you, what was it like working with Leo Laporte?
He's great. What you see is what you get with Leo. The good, the bad, and everything else in between. He is very transparent. And I had worked with him at Tech TV back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Not as much directly back then. I was on the web side of things. But I liked his approach to the audience. I liked his transparency. And so working up there in Petaluma had huge advantages in that you had the resources of that whole team, and you had the community that was already built there. Of course, Leo's a rogue gun sometimes, and he'd come walking through our set in the middle of our show, distracting us and things like that. So it wasn't
Right.
always, it wasn't a quiet, staid environment, but I don't think he wanted it that way.
Right.
Yeah, I kind of get that feeling
that's
when I
actually-
listen to him on his many. I'm still wondering how he runs over 100. What is it? 100 shows he runs. But I kind of get that feeling when I listen to him. He strikes me as very off the cuff.
I think he'd be fun to talk to, for sure.
Well, yeah, it's the same as he's fun to listen to, right? It's the same thing.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
okay, back to you mentioned growing your audience in relation. What have you done to actually grow your audience?
Yeah, that is one of the things that I've struggled the most with, to be honest. I was lucky enough at CNET to have the CNET engine, and to some extent at Twit, we had a Twit engine that could bring people in. So in both cases, I had the wider organization working on my behalf. There's no wider organization here, so we had to try some new things. One of them was a bunch of us who are independent sort of banded together in a loose federation and gave the community our sort of encouragement, not just approval, but encouragement to create their own site to carry our shows. So there's diamondclub.tv, which is run by a bunch of different folks in the community that provides live streaming, multiple channels, members of the community stream as well as us. They basically just take the open streams that we have and put them up there. There's also alphageekmedia.com, which does a more traditional radio approach to audio, but also video, where you can listen, and that has gotten us into things like TuneIn Radio and places like that. And then just asking folks in the community, if you like the show, tell somebody about it, and trying to get some word of mouth spreading out there. Probably the biggest way we get new listeners and get exposed to new listeners is having guests on. When you have a guest on the show, that guest is likely to tell their audience, hey, I was on Daily Tech News Show, and then hopefully expose a few people who didn't know about us.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
Sorry. Hang on, I gotta get a drink. My throat is killing me. One sec, guys.
Sorry.
There we go.
Better.
Yeah. So,
Dead air.
yes, there's always delete. Anyway, okay. So, but the other thing that I've noticed that happens with your show, and this is, again, kind of goes back to the community aspect, is you've got people that are sending in their own custom intros.
Yeah, that just kind of started on its own. I think it was a guy who was in radio was the first one. I know I have several people in radio who did this. Just sent in a short Daily Tech News Show is brought to you by you, the audience, kind of either like a public radio or what you'd hear at a sports broadcast. The following broadcast is brought to you by. And I thought that was great. So I played it before the show. And when I did that, a bunch of other folks said, well, I want to make one of those too. So they started sending them in. I did a couple of things, unfortunately, that means I can't use a lot of those early ones. First of all, I changed the URL. The Patreon I had been using was under my personal username. So eventually, once I realized it was going to stick around, I changed it to be patreon.com/DTNS. So I needed new ones of that. And then I started to realize that they were getting a little long, as funny as they were. And so I had to change it to reduce the amount of time that we spend on them. But it was so cool to just see people on their own saying, hey, here's an element of the show that you didn't think of that we're all going to contribute to. And I hope that keeps going.
Yeah, I find it kind of, there were some ones that you just hear and you go, oh, that's funny.
Yeah. No, there's been some real good ones.
What? Okay, let's shift and kind of away from the show and go into the more the topical area. I mean, there's so many different areas we could touch on, but as it relates to the business owner and, the podcaster, the entrepreneur, Where do you see tech? What are some of the biggest trends that you see coming in tech in 2017?
Yeah, a lot of the trends are things you might expect. Internet of Things is getting a lot of attention. We're seeing some serious attention being paid to security for not just things like cameras, but door locks and things like that. And you obviously think, well, door locks, yeah, I want those to secure because they lock my door. But beyond that, you don't want them to be infected with malware that turns them into a bot that is sending spam, even if they keep your door locked. You just don't want to contribute to the problem. There's been a lot of denial of service attacks on the back of these devices. So there's some serious attention being paid to them. At the same time, a lot more people are starting to use them, and that ties into another trend, which is these voice assistants, led right now by Amazon Echo and the Amazon voice services that are tying into these Internet of Things devices so that you can tell your device, turn on the lights, and it turns on the lights, and do all kinds of other home automation cool tricks. Google has one of these devices out there now as well, so they are quickly becoming a competitor to the Amazon voice services. There's also Cortana and Siri, and Samsung has their own Viv out there. So you're going to see a lot more of that arena get attention. There's a lot of attention on the blockchain, which if it sounds vaguely familiar, it's probably because you've heard it used in relation to Bitcoin. Blockchain is the open ledger that allows Bitcoin to work. Now, I'm not going to deep dive into what all that means, because that could lead us down a rabbit hole, right?
I remember the show you did where someone tried to explain what the blockchain was.
Yeah, I tried to do my best on that. So if you want to know more, you might want to check that out. But essentially what it does is it allows you to have validation of things that happened without having to have a trusted third party do it. It uses some tricks of encryption, et cetera, to make that happen. And that's how Bitcoin can work at all. A lot of companies are starting to look to use it for other purposes. So financial companies in particular would like to use it to track transactions, contracts, things like that. So we're going to see a lot more use of the blockchain coming up. Then there's also autonomous cars and AI and that whole arena. As I mentioned with the poker playing, there's a lot of machine learning going on, which also ties into those voice assistants because that's how they know how to interpret what you say. Autonomous cars need that kind of intelligence to be able to drive around. And we have actual autonomous cars on the streets doing tests in several parts of the world right now. So those are, off the top of my head anyway, some of the major trends.
I'll tell you, I am so, when it comes to the autonomous cars, I cannot wait till those become standard because being able to drive, that would be awesome.
It will be a while before we get them everywhere, but I'm right there with you, man. Like just not having to deal and let the car do the driving. Can't wait.
Exactly. And not having to depend on other people, which is what we have to do now. Taxis or bus or whatever.
Yeah, and not.
So
there's some advantages to this. In fact, we did a story yesterday about a coffee house that is run by a robot arm. So it has automatic machines that make the coffee, and then the robot arm delivers the coffee to you. And one of the advantages to it, it's not going to be better than a really highly trained barista would be, I suppose. But one of the advantages is that it's consistent, and you don't have to expel your name to the barista to make sure that they get your name right and things like that. Once you've put in the data is there. And I feel like that's going to be one of the advantages of autonomous cars too, right? You don't have to have that long conversation of, well, no, it's the cross street, I guess, is kind of near this. You just tell it the address and it goes there.
Can't wait on
Michael,
that.
I'm thinking of your mother.
My mom couldn't find her. Well, I love my mother, but she cannot find her way over, outside of a paper box.
You need an autonomous mother.
We need an Exactly.
Oh my goodness, wow. The other area, and I've heard you actually touch on this a little tiny bit in passing as stories come up. But the other thing that I'm watching for is the accessibility when it comes to different technologies. Like Facebook attempting to make it so that it tells what is in a picture. Now, granted, it doesn't do as good of a job. Or Twitter making it so that you can input, if you upload a picture, you can input what that picture is about, the alt tagging. To me, I'm just watching some of that, and I'm watching some of these companies that are actually making an effort to make things accessible for the blind and visually impaired, and I'm utterly fascinated, even from 5 years ago.
Yeah, there's some very interesting technology in and of its own just on making accessibility work. I have to give credit to Allison Sheridan of Nosilicast over at Podfeed, who has made sure to keep me focused on that topic and pay attention to it. Because, again, that's another one of those topics that's not going to get buzzy at the top of Google News or Tech Meme, but it is important to a large section of the audience. And the rest of the audience is going to benefit from it sometimes as well, just as side benefits. So, yeah, I've been really encouraged to see Microsoft, Apple, and others at least putting it front and center and saying, yeah, we're paying attention to this.
Yeah, and I think, small business owners need to pay attention to that too, especially when it comes to their websites. If their websites are not accessible, you're going to lose users over that because they're going to go, oh, it's not accessible, I can't use it, I'm going to go on to somewhere else.
Yeah, and it falls into that category. I remember being very frustrated with folks at one point when I was working on the web at Tech TV, where part of the site wasn't working on IE for Mac OS. This is how long ago it was. And I was like, this isn't good. We need to make this work for everybody. And the engineers were saying, well, it's only 10% of the audience, right?
Yeah.
Like, sure, yeah. So let's just throw that audience away, and the same thing, the same attitude used to apply more readily to accessibility, which was, well, hate to say it, but we have to prioritize the resources, and it's a small percentage of the audience. But if you prioritize these things, and when I use accessibility here, I'm not using it just for visually impaired users, but also accessibility across platforms, across devices, so that if something is seen on a smaller screen, it looks just as good as something on a larger screen. That was another one, screen resolution optimization. You are going to make sure that you don't leave people out by accident, and those people have knock-on effects. If someone can't access your site, they're certainly not going to say nice things about it, and they may say negative things about it. But if you make it so that the majority of people can use it in all but the most edgy of cases, like, okay, it doesn't work on my Commodore 64, but there's always a limit, you're going to have more of a chance of people enjoying it and passing it along.
No, I agree with that. It's interesting, how things have changed, and technology is like the great equalizer for someone who is blind or visually impaired. Where before, you'd have a phone book and you'd have to open up the phone book and take a magnifier and try to read the phone book, or and you used to have to carry these gigantic books around, these big, large print books around.
I remember those.
In high school, and I had to do that in high school and in middle school. And now you can get a book that you can either put on your phone, or you can put it on your screen and blow it up with the program like Zoom Text, which is what I use. And our whole life revolves around technology. It's fascinating, when it's inclusive.
Yeah.
It's intuitively inclusive, as long as people aren't being stupid about it, and not stupid, ignorant about it. Because I don't think they're really being stupid. I don't think they're doing it to be jerks. Although I have met some web developers I wanted to strangle.
I think everybody has, Michael.
When web developers told me, well, if you if the client is willing to pay for it, then we'll do it. And I'm like, do it anyway. How hard is it to tag a freaking picture? come on.
And it's that perception of difficulty more than the actual difficulty that you're battling sometimes. Because I'm right there with you. I
think you're right.
The leveling that the internet has made possible is incredible, and what I hate to see is when we don't take advantage of that. When we silo things off and we put in artificial limits that don't need to be there, that actually
Agreed.
create limits that aren't productive and they're not really good. The big productivity gain, the big monetary gain, the big social gains of the internet, in my opinion, come from its openness and its accessibility in the widest sense.
I completely agree. And, the other thing is, it doesn't matter if you live in a small town like we do, or if you live in San Francisco. You can still access this information and take advantage of this information. It's fascinating to me.
I have another question as I'm sitting here and I'm listening. You talk about the openness in the internet, and you talk about stuff like that. With the incoming administration, how do you see technology interacting with different policies and orders and rulings and whatnot?
It's impossible to say. My approach to this administration is to look at what they actually do and not try to guess. Because I think the election showed us that things shift very rapidly, and what actually takes place is sometimes very different than what people expected to take place. So I am watching very closely, and I'm very curious to see how the technology companies are going to interact, what kind of policies are going to be put in place. So far, there's really been nothing but meetings and people shaking hands and talking about stuff.
Right.
We've seen SoftBank come in and talk about bringing jobs, which is a positive thing, and I hope that happens. We've seen Foxconn even follow on with that a little bit as well. We know there's a draft coming, and by the time a lot of people listen to this, it may in fact already be an executive order to review cybersecurity. But the draft that I read about this morning didn't have much new in it that we have seen on the previous president. It was merely to take 60 days, look at critical infrastructure, and come up with a plan. So it's when that plan comes along that you're willing to, or that you're ready to take an evaluation. The only major thing that we've seen so far, and it's not even major, is with the new FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai. He took the plan to create a standard for set-top boxes for cable television off the table. Now, he hasn't ended the proceedings, so he could still reintroduce a new plan. But we're not going to get something very soon that makes apps available to access cable television available across platform, but we may still. So there's not a lot to say at this point.
What do you think? I mean, go ahead, Mike.
And that brings up another point, kind of a side point, but it used to be about, okay, I've got my TV, I've got my cable, I've got all these different programs, and then, we've gone to satellite, and, we're getting our stuff through satellite. Now, we're unplugged for the most part from the standpoint of, we don't have cable. We access all our information on the internet. But one of my biggest frustrations is when you go to one of the major networks and you're wanting to get information, you're wanting to get more of the story, and you can't get it because all you can get is a clip, because your cable provider, your internet provider, does not support whatever channel that you happen to be watching. I've seen this with pretty much all the major channels now. It's because we have a small cable provider here, and none of them work with our system, so we can't access.
Well, I think what you're probably running into is
frustrating.
you needing a cable TV subscription or some kind of subscription to access things. It's more often the case that they're saying it's your ISP because the ISP also sells a cable subscription, right? And for the most part, those stories aren't the main stories. Most of the networks put the general news up for consumption, like you say, for clips. It is larger shows, like maybe a full-on 60 minutes or a 48 hours that they will put behind that authentication wall. And that's going to change as things come along. We're already seeing Sling TV, PlayStation View, DirecTV Now as options to get some kind of service over the internet without having to install cable separately from your internet. And they allow you to log in to the apps of those networks. So if you paid $20 a month to Sling TV, you'll be able to log into some of those with the Sling TV. Same thing with the $30 or $40 you'd pay for PlayStation View. You'll be able to log into a lot of networks with that. So the options are starting to loosen up. We're in that awkward period, though, between the two different ways of doing it.
So I guess, I'm thinking one last topic, and then we probably should wrap up. But this came up. What was it? Beginning, middle of the year, and I'm kind of curious as to where you think it's going to go. And what I'm talking about is the Apple iPhone FBI scandal. Especially now with the incoming administration, do you think that's going to come up again?
It'll come up again, whether it's Apple and the FBI or whether it's some other case. It's already come up at least twice since the San Bernardino case. And it is something that you've seen people who you think would be thinking one way think the opposite. And I know the president during the campaign supported the FBI's side of that, but there hasn't been a lot of discussion of that since. The cybersecurity draft proposal I saw didn't mention it directly in any way. I don't expect, and I've been way wrong before on these kind of expectations, I don't expect there to be any kind of legislation. I don't expect there to be an executive order regarding encryption directly. I think what's happening is there's a lot of outreach between the government, and this happened in the previous administration too, to say, let's figure this out in a way that works. Let's not just have a big public argument over it. Because, the fact of the matter is there are folks in the military who understand, look, if you give us some kind of weakened encryption, that's actually bad for a lot of things we do. We don't want there to be weakened encryption out there necessarily. We just want a better way to be able to see what the bad guys are up to.
Makes
yeah,
sense.
it really does. I mean, and I know when it came about, I not only listened to you, but I listened to, Kim Commando and a couple others to really make sure I understood everything, because I didn't want to just take one side. I understood both sides, but, then I kind of wrote my own opinion on the matter at the time on my own blog. And, I'm honestly just fascinated as to where I think technology is going. And I really enjoy listening to shows like yours because you really kind of give a good broken down understanding of things, especially things like blockchain and all that, where I'm like, okay, I don't quite get this.
Hurts your head.
Yeah, it really does. You sit there and you listen to it and you're like, huh?
Well, and because a lot of it requires an entirely different way of thinking than the assumptions we have. And something like the Apple FBI case, there was a legal aspect, there was an intelligence aspect, there was a technology aspect, there was a social aspect. There's all these different elements that make it a really complex topic.
Oh yeah, and I think shows like yours have done a really good job of bringing it and making it understandable. And so, hey, Tom, I wanted to say thank you for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's
we
fun.
really enjoyed
it's fun
it.
to talk to both you guys.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a tech geek, and hey, before we go, are you a Mac or a PC person?
Both, and Linux too. I've got a Windows Surface Pro, I've got a MacBook Pro, and I've got a ThinkPad with Ubuntu running on it.
Oh, wow. So all the best of all worlds.
It's an occupational hazard. Part of it is just fun for me. I'm not going to lie, but part of it is I want to make sure that I participate in all the ecosystems, so that when I talk about them, I at least have some genuine experience with it.
Understandable.
That makes a lot of
Understandable.
sense.
Well, again, thank you for being on the show. It has been really enjoyable. Hey, if people want to contact you, how can they get in contact?
The easiest way is to just go to tommerritt.com. There's all the things that I do there, as well as contact information and all that.
All right. Beautiful. Awesome. Well, with that, you have been listening to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast. I'm Teresa.
And I'm Michael.
And we are out.
You've been listening to the Small Business Puzzle Podcast. To catch all our past shows, visit sbppodcast.com.